Maria Santos never imagined she would hold a rifle, let alone become one of the most feared snipers in modern warfare. Born in a small farming village outside Sarajevo, she spent her childhood helping her grandmother tend to chickens and learning to sew traditional embroidery patterns. Her hands were steady from years of delicate needlework, her eyes sharp from spotting predators threatening the livestock from great distances. When the conflict erupted in her homeland, Maria was just 19 years old, working as a seamstress in the local textile factory. She had dreams of opening her own shop someday, maybe even moving to the capital city. Her biggest worry was whether Alexander, the baker's son, would finally ask her to dance at the upcoming harvest festival. The war changed everything overnight. The first bombs fell on a Tuesday morning while Maria was walking to work. She watched, in horror, as her neighbor's house exploded in a shower of concrete and dust. Mrs. Petrovich, who had taught her to make the perfect apple strudel, was gone in an instant. The textile factory where Maria worked became a pile of rubble by the end of the week. Refugees flooded into their village, carrying stories of atrocities from the front lines. Families torn apart, entire communities destroyed, children orphaned in a matter of hours. Maria's own family took in 3 displaced children whose parents had been killed in the crossfire. The small farmhouse became cramped. Food grew scarce, and the sound of distant artillery became a constant backdrop to their daily lives. As weeks turned into months, the war crept closer to their village. Supply lines were cut, and the local militia struggled to defend their territory with outdated weapons and little training. Maria watched strong men return from the front lines broken and defeated, speaking in hushed tones about enemy snipers, who could pick off targets from impossible distances. One evening, while helping to bandage wounded soldiers in the makeshift medical station her grandmother had set up in their kitchen, Maria overheard a conversation that would change her life forever. 2 officers were discussing their desperate need for skilled marksmen. They had plenty of willing fighters, but few who possessed the patience, steadiness, and natural ability required for precision shooting. "We need someone who can outthink them, outlast them," one officer said, his voice heavy with frustration. "Their snipers are picking us apart. We lose 3 men for every one of theirs we take down." Maria found herself thinking about her childhood spent hunting rabbits with her grandfather's old rifle. She remembered the pride in his eyes when she made her first clean shot at age 12, dropping a rabbit from 200 meters away. "Steady hands and a calm heart," he had told her. "That's all you need." The next morning, Maria made a decision that shocked her entire family. She walked to the recruitment station and volunteered for sniper training. The recruiting officer looked at her with disbelief, then broke into laughter. A 19-year-old seamstress wanting to become a military sniper? It was absurd. "Girl, this isn't embroidery work," he scoffed. "Go home and help with the cooking. Leave the fighting to the men." But Maria persisted. She demonstrated her shooting ability with an old hunting rifle, consistently hitting targets that seasoned soldiers missed. Word of her unusual accuracy spread quickly through the ranks. Within a week, she found herself at a remote training camp, one of only 3 women among 50 recruits. The training was brutal. Physical conditioning pushed her body to its limits, while mental preparation tested her psychological resilience. Many of the male recruits openly questioned her presence, making crude jokes about her abilities and suggesting she belonged in a kitchen rather than on a battlefield. Maria endured their mockery silently, channeling her anger into focus. During shooting exercises, she consistently outperformed her critics. Her scores were not just good, they were exceptional. Instructors who had initially dismissed her began paying attention. Her natural talent, combined with an almost supernatural level of patience and concentration, made her stand out among the trainees. The psychological training proved more challenging than the physical demands. Maria had to learn to kill without hesitation, to see enemy soldiers not as human beings with families and dreams, but as targets to be eliminated. She struggled with this aspect more than she admitted to anyone, often lying awake at night questioning whether she was making the right choice. 3 months into her training, Maria received news that would steel her resolve forever. Her village had been attacked. Her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident, had been killed along with 12 other civilians. The bakery where Alexander worked was destroyed, and he was missing, presumed dead. Standing over her grandmother's grave, Maria felt something inside her harden. The doubt and uncertainty that had plagued her during training vanished, replaced by a cold determination. She would become the sniper her country needed, not just to win battles, but to ensure that no other family would suffer as hers had. When she returned to training, her instructors noticed the change immediately. Maria's shooting became even more precise, her patience even more remarkable. She could lie motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Her fellow trainees stopped their jokes and began treating her with the respect her abilities commanded. The final examination came 6 months after she had first walked into that recruitment station. Maria was given a modified Dragunov sniper rifle and tasked with hitting targets at distances ranging from 800 to 1,200 meters. She hit every single target, many through the bullseye. Her instructors exchanged meaningful glances. They had never seen natural talent like this. As Maria prepared for her first assignment, she carried with her not just exceptional marksmanship, skills, but the weight of personal loss and an unshakable determination to protect others from experiencing the same pain she had endured. The war had taken everything from her, but it had also forged her into something she never expected to become. The young seamstress with steady hands and sharp eyes was about to become a legend, though she had no way of knowing that her first mission would change the course of the entire conflict. Colonel Viktor Lazovich stared at the mission briefing with growing dread. For 6 months, his forces had been locked in a bloody stalemate with enemy troops who controlled the strategic mountain passes leading to the capital. Every attempt to advance had been met with devastating sniper fire from an enemy marksman known only as the Ghost of Khazara Ridge. This mysterious sniper had single-handedly stopped 3 major offensives, picking off officers and key personnel with surgical precision from distances that seemed impossible. Intelligence reports suggested he operated from a heavily fortified position nearly 2 miles away from the main battle lines, far beyond the range of their best snipers and artillery pieces. The enemy's psychological warfare was just as effective as their marksmanship. Bodies of fallen officers were left in open areas where retrieval was impossible, their deaths serving as constant reminders of the sniper's deadly presence. Morale among Lazovich's troops had plummeted to dangerous levels. Men who had fought bravely for months now hesitated to move during daylight hours, knowing that death could come from an invisible enemy at any moment. Lazovich's superiors had made their position clear during a tense video conference the previous evening. The spring offensive was scheduled to begin in just 2 weeks. If his forces could not advance past Khazara Ridge, the entire war effort would collapse. The enemy would have time to bring in reinforcements, and what had been a winnable conflict would drag on for years with devastating consequences. "We need that sniper eliminated," General Markovich had stated bluntly. "I don't care how you do it, Victor. Use artillery, airstrikes, whatever it takes, but that ridge must be cleared." The problem was that conventional approaches had already been tried and failed. Artillery strikes had proven ineffective against the fortified position, and the enemy's surface-to-air defenses made airstrikes too risky. 3 separate sniper teams had been deployed over the past month, each consisting of the Army's most experienced marksmen. None had returned. When Lazovich received word that a new sniper had completed training and was available for assignment, he was initially dismissive. Another green recruit would likely just become another casualty. But when he read Maria's training scores, he had to check the reports twice to make sure there hadn't been a clerical error. Her accuracy ratings were beyond anything he had seen in 20 years of military service. More importantly, her psychological evaluation indicated an unusual combination of patience, intelligence, and emotional stability that made her ideal for long-range operations requiring extended periods of isolation and stress. The fact that she was a 19-year-old woman gave Lazovich pause, but desperation had a way of overcoming prejudice. His conventional snipers had failed because they approached the problem conventionally. Perhaps an unconventional sniper could succeed where others had not. When Maria arrived at the forward command post, Lazovich was struck by how ordinary she appeared. Small in stature with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, she looked more like a farmer's daughter than a military assassin. She listened to the briefing without interrupting, asking only tactical questions about wind patterns, terrain, features, and the enemy's observed routines. "The target has been designated Ghost 1, Lazovich explained, pointing to aerial photographs of Kozara Ridge. "Intelligence suggests he operates from somewhere in this area, approximately 2,800 meters from our forward positions. No one has gotten closer than 1,500 meters without being eliminated." Maria studied the photographs with the methodical attention of someone examining a complex embroidery pattern. She traced possible sight lines with her finger, noting natural, cover and concealment opportunities. Her questions revealed a tactical understanding that surprised the veteran officers present. "What about weather patterns?" she asked. "Wind direction, temperature variations, humidity levels at different times of day?" "We have meteorological data," Lazovich replied, impressed by her thoroughness. "But Maria, you need to understand the reality of this mission. Ghost 1 has killed every sniper we've sent against him. This is likely a suicide mission." Maria's response was delivered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone that would haunt Lazovich for years afterward. "Colonel, my grandmother always told me that the best way to thread a needle is to be patient and aim true. I think the same principle applies here." The mission planning took 3 days. Maria insisted on personally scouting the approach routes, crawling through muddy trenches and navigating minefields to get within 100-200 meters of the target area. She observed enemy movement patterns, noting that Ghost 1 typically began firing around dawn and continued until late afternoon, suggesting he was using natural light rather than night vision equipment. Most intriguingly, she identified what appeared to be a fatal flaw in the enemy sniper's tactics. His shots always came from slightly different positions along the ridge, indicating that he moved between prepared firing positions. This suggested that despite his lethal effectiveness, he was following predictable patterns that a patient observer might be able to exploit. "He's good, but he's human," Maria explained to the briefing team. "Humans have habits, and habits can be predicted." The plan she proposed was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than trying to locate and destroy the enemy sniper's position, she would set up at maximum range and wait. Using careful observation and mathematical calculations based on the trajectory of his shots, she would predict his next firing position and have her rifle already aimed when he appeared. The key was distance. At 2,800 meters, she would be operating at the absolute edge of her rifle's effective range, but she would also be beyond the range of anything the enemy could bring to bear against her. It was a shot that required not just exceptional marksmanship, but also precise calculations of wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions. "The mathematics have to be perfect," she explained. "At that range, a degree of error in wind calculation means missing by several meters. But if I can make the shot, it ends this stalemate immediately." Lazovich's artillery experts ran the ballistics, calculations multiple times, each reaching the same conclusion. The shot was theoretically possible, but practically impossible. Too many variables, too much distance, too many things that could go wrong. But as Maria packed her equipment and prepared to move into position, she seemed unnaturally calm. She had requested specific types of ammunition, meteorological instruments, and a rifle modified with a specialized long-range scope. Her attention to detail reminded Lazovich of an engineer preparing for a complex construction project rather than a soldier preparing for combat. On her final evening at the command post, Maria sat alone cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she had once used for embroidery work. When Lazovich approached to offer final words of encouragement, she looked up with eyes that seemed much older than her 19 years. "Colonel," she said quietly, "they think I'll crack under pressure because I'm young and inexperienced. But they don't understand that patience isn't about age or experience. It's about understanding that some things are worth waiting for." As she disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, moving toward a firing position that would test the absolute limits of human marksmanship, Lazovich found himself hoping that the young woman's quiet confidence was justified. The fate of the entire campaign and thousands of lives now rested on her ability to make an impossible shot. Maria began her approach to the firing position at 2:30 a.m., moving through terrain that had claimed the lives of dozens of soldiers over the past 6 months. The darkness was both her ally and her enemy, concealing her movement from enemy observers. While making navigation treacherous through areas riddled with mines and tripwires, she carried 60 pounds of equipment including her modified rifle, specialized ammunition, meteorological instruments, camouflage materials, and enough food and water for 3 days. Every item had been carefully selected and positioned in her pack to maintain perfect balance while crawling through mud and over rocky terrain. The route she had chosen was deliberately indirect, following a dried riverbed that added nearly 2 miles to her journey but provided natural cover from enemy observation posts. Intelligence reports indicated that the area was lightly patrolled but heavily monitored with motion sensors and infrared cameras positioned at key points. Moving at a painfully slow pace to avoid triggering detection equipment, Maria covered only 50 meters in the first hour. She paused frequently to listen for sounds that might indicate enemy patrols or to check for wires that could trigger explosive devices. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory from childhood hunting trips. "Patience, little one. The forest will tell you its secrets if you know how to listen." At 4:15 a.m., she encountered her first serious obstacle. A section of the riverbed was illuminated by floodlights from an enemy checkpoint positioned on higher ground. 3 guards were visible in the bunker, and she could see the barrel of a heavy machine gun pointed directly down her intended path. Maria spent 45 minutes studying the guard rotation schedule, timing their movements and identifying a brief window when all 3 guards would be facing away from her position. When the opportunity came, she had exactly 90 seconds to cross 20 meters of open ground and reach cover on the opposite side. She made the crossing in 87 seconds, her heart pounding as she pressed herself against a concrete drainage pipe and listened for any sign that she had been spotted. The guards continued their routine conversations about the war, their families back home, and their eagerness for the conflict to end. They had no idea that their most dangerous enemy had just passed within 50 meters of their position. As dawn approached, Maria reached the base of Hill 247, a strategic overlook that would provide clear sight lines to Kozara Ridge. The hillside was steep and covered with loose rocks that could easily trigger a landslide if disturbed. She began the ascent using techniques learned during mountain training, distributing her weight carefully and testing each handhold before committing to the next movement. The climb took 3 hours. By 8:30 a.m., she had reached a natural depression near the summit that offered excellent concealment while providing an unobstructed view of the target area. Using her range-finding equipment, she confirmed the distance to Kozara Ridge, 2,847 meters, slightly farther than the intelligence estimates, but still within the theoretical range of her weapon. Maria spent the next 2 hours setting up her hide site with obsessive attention to detail. She arranged camouflage netting to break up her silhouette while ensuring that her rifle barrel would not create telltale shadows or reflections. Emergency escape routes were identified and memorized. Food and water were positioned within easy reach without requiring movement that might compromise her concealment. Most critically, she began the complex process of calculating the ballistics for her shot. Using a handheld meteorological station, she recorded wind speed and direction at 5-minute intervals, noting that the mountain valley created swirling wind patterns that changed dramatically throughout the day. Temperature variations between her position and the target area would affect bullet trajectory, as would the humidity levels that altered air density. The mathematics were staggering in their complexity. At 2,147 meters, her bullet would take approximately 3.2 seconds to reach the target, during which time it would drop nearly 40 feet due to gravity while drifting several feet left or right, depending on wind conditions. She filled a notebook with calculations, double-checking every figure and creating contingency tables for different atmospheric conditions. At 10:15 a.m., Ghost 1 fired his first shot of the day. Through her high-powered scope, Maria saw the muzzle flash from a position approximately 300 meters east of where intelligence reports had suggested he operated. She immediately began tracking the trajectory of his shot backward, using the impact point visible through her scope to calculate the precise location of his firing position. Over the next 4 hours, Ghost 1 fired 17 more shots, each from a slightly different location along the ridge. Maria meticulously recorded each shot, building a detailed map of his movement pattern. What emerged was a picture of a highly skilled but predictable sniper who followed a systematic rotation between 6 prepared positions. The pattern revealed that Ghost 1 spent approximately 20 minutes at each position before moving to the next. He followed the same sequence every day, taking advantage of natural rock formations that provided excellent concealment while offering clear fields of fire toward the Army positions below. Most importantly, Maria identified a critical vulnerability in his tactics. When moving between positions, Ghost 1 was briefly exposed while crossing a small clearing approximately 15 meters wide. The exposure lasted only 8 to 10 seconds, but for a sniper of Maria's caliber, 8 seconds was an eternity. By 2:30 p.m., she had completed her calculations and prepared for the shot. Her rifle was loaded with a single armor-piercing round specifically manufactured for extreme long-range shooting. The scope was adjusted for the precise distance and atmospheric conditions. Her breathing was controlled and steady. Her heart rate slowed through meditation techniques learned during sniper training. Ghost 1 was currently in his 4th position, which meant he would soon be moving to position 5. Based on his established pattern, he would cross the exposed clearing in approximately 12 minutes. Maria settled into her final shooting position, adjusting her body to minimize fatigue while maintaining perfect stability. She thought briefly of her grandmother, of Alexander, of all the soldiers who had died because of the sniper she was about to engage. The personal motivations that had driven her to this moment crystallized into cold professional focus. This was no longer about revenge or patriotism. This was about precision, patience, and the mathematical certainty that her calculations were correct. Through her scope, she could see the clearing where Ghost 1 would appear. The crosshairs were positioned exactly where her computations indicated. He would be most vulnerable. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not quite touching, but ready to apply the precise pressure needed to fire. At 2:41 p.m., movement appeared at the edge of her field of view. Ghost 1 was beginning his transition. To position 5, following the exact route she had predicted, Maria controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and began the final countdown that would either end 6 months of stalemate or confirm the critics who said she would crack under pressure. In 30 seconds, she would discover whether mathematics, patience, and steady hands could overcome an enemy who had seemed invincible. The war, the lives of thousands of soldiers, and her own survival all depended on what happened in the next few moments. At 2:47 p.m., Maria saw the first hint of movement through her scope. A shadow shifted against the rocky outcropping where she had calculated Ghost 1 would emerge. Her breathing slowed to a rhythm so controlled it seemed almost mechanical. Each inhalation and exhalation timed to keep her rifle absolutely steady. 29 seconds remained until he would enter the killing zone. Through the scope's magnification, the distant ridge appeared close enough to touch, but Maria knew that, at this range, the slightest tremor in her hands would translate to a miss measured in meters rather than inches. The modified Dragunov rifle weighed just over 10 pounds, but after holding it in position for hours, it felt like it weighed 24 seconds. Ghost 1 stepped into partial view, still largely concealed by shadows and vegetation. Maria could make out the outline of his camouflaged ghillie suit, designed to blend perfectly with the rocky terrain of Kozara Ridge. He moved with the confident stride of someone who had never been challenged at this range, someone who believed himself beyond the reach of enemy fire. 18 seconds. Maria's training took over completely. Her conscious mind stepped aside, allowing muscle memory and calculated instinct to control her actions. The crosshairs tracked smoothly across her field of view, following the path she had predicted with mathematical precision. Her finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without firing. 15 seconds. Wind conditions were holding steady at 4.2 meters per second from the northwest, exactly matching her calculations from 2 hours earlier. Temperature remained constant at 23 degrees Celsius. Humidity had dropped slightly, which would reduce air resistance and increase bullet velocity by approximately 12 meters per second. All variables were within acceptable parameters. 12 seconds. Ghost. One paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the valley below through his own scope. Maria could see enough detail to identify the rifle he carried, a modified Barrett, M82 with an advanced targeting system that had made him nearly invincible at shorter ranges. His tactical vest showed the wear of months of combat, and she noticed he favored his right leg slightly, suggesting an old injury that might slow his movements. 8 seconds. He began crossing the clearing with smooth, confident steps. Maria's scope tracked him perfectly, the crosshairs positioned exactly where her calculations indicated he would be most vulnerable. The mathematical precision of the moment was almost beautiful in its clarity. Trajectory, wind drift, bullet drop, and time of flight all converging into a single point in space and time. 5 seconds. Ghost. One reached the center of the clearing, exactly where Maria had predicted he would be. Through the scope, she could see his face for the first time. Younger than she had expected, with the focused expression of a professional doing his job. For a fraction of a second, she saw him not as a target, but as another human being caught in the machinery of war. 3 seconds. The moment of human doubt passed. Maria's grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes, little one, the hardest thing to do is also the most necessary. She thought of the soldiers who had died because of this man's marksmanship, of the families destroyed by his precision shooting, of the war that would continue indefinitely if he remained in position. 1 second. Maria squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had once used to guide thread through delicate fabric. The rifle discharged with a thunderous crack that echoed across the mountainside, the massive muzzle flash temporarily blinding her scope view. The recoil drove the weapon back into her shoulder with tremendous force, but she maintained her position and immediately began tracking for a second shot if necessary. 2 seconds of flight time. The bullet traveled through changing air densities, fought against crosswinds that tried to push it off course, and arced through the thin mountain air at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Every calculation Maria had made over the past 6 hours was tested in those 3 seconds of flight time, impact. Through her scope, Maria saw Ghost 1 simply drop out of sight. No dramatic death scene, no final gesture. He was there one moment, and gone the next, disappearing behind the rocky outcropping as if he had never existed. The shot had been so precise that she couldn't immediately tell if she had hit him or if he had simply taken cover. For 30 seconds, nothing moved on Kozara Ridge. The silence was profound after months of constant sniper fire. Maria kept her rifle trained on the target area, watching for any sign of movement that would indicate she had missed and that Ghost One was repositioning for a counterattack. Then she saw it, a small red stain spreading across the rocks where he had fallen. The mathematical precision of her shot had been perfect. The bullet had found its mark after traveling nearly 2 miles through challenging atmospheric conditions, eliminating the most dangerous sniper the enemy possessed. Maria allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to process what had just happened. She had made the longest confirmed sniper kill in the history of the conflict, possibly one of the longest in military history. More importantly, she had removed a strategic threat that had paralyzed an entire front for 6 months. But celebration would have to wait. Her muzzle flash had been visible for miles, and enemy forces would be converging on her position within minutes. She quickly began breaking down her equipment, packing only the essentials needed for a rapid withdrawal. The detailed calculations, meteorological readings, and range cards that had made the shot possible were carefully destroyed to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. As she prepared to evacuate her position, Maria could hear activity beginning on Khazara Ridge. Enemy soldiers were moving toward the area where Ghost One had fallen, their shouts carrying across the valley as they discovered that their invincible sniper was dead. More importantly, she could hear something else. The sound of her own army's artillery beginning to fire. Colonel Lazovich had positioned his forces to take immediate advantage if the sniper threat was eliminated. The spring offensive that had been delayed for months was beginning at last. Maria began her withdrawal at 3:15 p.m., exactly 33 minutes after taking the shot that would end the stalemate on Khazara Ridge. She moved quickly but carefully, knowing that enemy forces would be searching desperately for the sniper who had eliminated their most valuable asset. Behind her, the sound of battle intensified as her army advanced through positions that had been impossible to approach for months. The single bullet she had fired was having consequences far beyond the death of one enemy soldier. It was changing the entire course of the war. As she navigated back through the minefield and sensor networks she had bypassed on her approach, Maria allowed herself one moment of quiet satisfaction. The critics who had said she would crack under pressure had been wrong. When the moment of truth arrived, her steady hands and patient heart had proven more than adequate for the task. The young seamstress had become a sniper. Now she had to survive, long enough to discover what that transformation would mean for the rest of her life. News of Ghost One's death spread through enemy ranks like wildfire within hours of Maria's successful shot. The psychological impact was devastating for troops who had considered their legendary sniper to be invincible. But for the enemy command structure, the death represented something far more dangerous than the loss of a single soldier, however skilled. Major General Dmitry Volkov received the report while reviewing battle plans at his headquarters 15 miles behind the front lines. A veteran of 3 previous conflicts, Volkov understood immediately that losing Ghost One meant losing the strategic advantage that had kept the enemy armies locked in stalemate for 6 months. More troubling was the nature of the kill. Intelligence. Reports confirmed that Ghost One had been eliminated by a single shot from an estimated range of nearly 2,900 meters, far beyond what conventional snipers could achieve. This suggested that the opposing force had deployed a marksman of extraordinary capability, someone who posed a threat not just to individual soldiers, but to the entire command structure. "Find this sniper," Volkov ordered his intelligence chief. "I want to know who made this shot, where they were positioned, and how quickly we can eliminate them." Within 6 hours, enemy reconnaissance teams had identified Maria's firing position on Hill 247. Analysis of the site revealed a level of preparation and tactical sophistication that impressed even veteran soldiers. The hide site had been constructed with near-perfect concealment, and the ballistic calculations left behind in hastily burned notebooks suggested mathematical skills far beyond normal military training. Most significantly, forensic analysis of the bullet trajectory confirmed what Volkov feared most. The enemy possessed a sniper capable of engaging targets at ranges previously thought impossible. This individual could potentially eliminate key personnel from distances that made counterattack nearly impossible. Volkov's response was swift and overwhelming. He diverted an entire company of Special Forces soldiers to hunt for the mysterious sniper, equipped with advanced detection equipment and led by Captain Alexei Kozlov, the enemy's best tracking specialist. The mission was given absolute priority, with orders to capture or kill the target, regardless of other battlefield considerations. Meanwhile, Maria's return journey to friendly lines became increasingly perilous as enemy forces flooded the area where her shot had originated. What should have been a 6-hour withdrawal stretched into a 3-day ordeal of cat-and-mouse survival against increasingly sophisticated pursuit teams. On her first night of evasion, Maria detected the approach of a 4-man patrol while hiding in a destroyed farmhouse 2 miles from her original firing position. The soldiers were using night vision equipment and thermal imaging devices, technology that made traditional camouflage techniques inadequate. She spent 4 hours buried under debris in the farmhouse basement, listening to enemy soldiers search the building above her. Their conversation revealed the intensity of the hunt that had been organized specifically to find her. Bounties had been placed on her capture, and Special Forces units from across the front had been reassigned to the search operation. When the high patrol finally moved on, Maria realized that her usual extraction route had been compromised. Radio intercepts revealed that enemy forces had established checkpoints along all likely escape paths, and aerial surveillance was being conducted around the clock using helicopter-mounted thermal cameras. Her training in wilderness survival became crucial for staying alive. Maria moved only during weather conditions that would interfere with thermal detection, taking advantage of rain and fog to mask her heat signature. She avoided all established paths and roads, instead following stream beds and ridge lines that would be difficult for pursuit teams to monitor effectively. Food became scarce after her emergency rations ran out on the second day. She resorted to techniques learned during childhood hunting trips, catching small animals and foraging for edible plants while avoiding areas where cooking smoke might reveal her position. Water was obtained from streams and collected rainwater, carefully purified using tablets from her survival kit. Most challenging was the psychological pressure of constant pursuit. Maria could hear helicopter patrols overhead at all hours, and several times she detected the approach of ground teams, close enough to hear their radio communications. The knowledge that dozens of enemy soldiers were actively hunting her created stress levels that tested her mental resilience to its limits. On the second night, while sheltering in a cave system in the lower mountains, Maria intercepted radio, traffic that made the strategic importance of her situation crystal clear. Enemy forces were delaying their own counteroffensive, specifically to focus resources on capturing or killing her. The success of her single shot had created ripple effects across the entire theater of operations. She also learned that her own command structure was taking extraordinary risks to extract her. Colonel Lazovich had committed a full company of special operations soldiers to create diversionary operations designed to draw enemy attention away from her likely escape routes. 3 helicopters were standing by for emergency extraction if she could reach any of several predetermined landing zones. The personal cost of her success was becoming apparent as well. Intercepted communications revealed that enemy forces had identified her as Maria Santos, the seamstress sniper, and had placed a substantial bounty on her capture alive. Information about her background, her family, and her village had been distributed to every enemy unit in the region. This intelligence represented both a threat and an opportunity. The fact that enemy forces wanted her alive suggested they hoped to extract information about other snipers and future operational plans. But it also meant that capture teams might be more cautious in their approach. potentially giving her opportunities to escape that wouldn't exist if they simply wanted to kill her. On her third day of evasion, Maria made a decision that would define the remainder of her military career. Rather than continuing to flee toward friendly lines, she began moving in the opposite direction, deeper into enemy-controlled territory. Her reasoning was tactically sound. Pursuit teams would be concentrating their efforts along expected escape routes, leaving areas behind enemy lines relatively unmonitored. More importantly, she had identified an opportunity to turn from hunted to hunter. The same radio intercepts that revealed the intensity of the search operation also provided intelligence about enemy command positions and high-value targets operating in the region. If she could remain undetected long enough to reach optimal firing positions, she could potentially eliminate key personnel and further disrupt enemy operations. The decision represented a fundamental shift in Maria's approach to warfare. No longer content to simply complete assigned missions and return to safety, she was beginning to think like a strategic asset capable of independent operations behind enemy lines. The young woman who had once worried about dancing at village festivals was evolving into something far more dangerous. As she moved deeper into enemy territory, carrying just her rifle and basic survival equipment, Maria began to understand why her single shot had created such panic among enemy forces. She wasn't just a sniper anymore. She was a force multiplier capable of changing the strategic balance through individual action. The hunt that had been organized to capture or kill her was about to become a very different kind of game, one where the roles of predator and prey would prove far more fluid than her pursuers anticipated. Over the next 3 weeks, Maria transformed from a hunted fugitive into a ghost that haunted enemy operations across a 100-mile front. Operating entirely alone behind enemy lines, she eliminated 17 high-value targets, including 3 colonels, 2 intelligence officers, and a visiting general who had come to oversee the search operations against her. Each kill was executed with the same mathematical precision that had made her famous, but now she was incorporating lessons learned from constant evasion and survival. Maria had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy movements, using their own communications against them to identify targets and plan escape routes. The psychological impact on enemy forces was beyond anything military strategists had anticipated. Soldiers who had been willing to fight courageously against conventional forces became paralyzed by the knowledge that death could come at any moment from an invisible sniper operating at impossible ranges. Officers refused to expose themselves during daylight hours, crippling their ability to coordinate operations effectively. Major General Volkov found himself trapped in an underground bunker, unable to visit forward positions or conduct normal command functions, because Maria had demonstrated the ability to eliminate targets from distances that made traditional security measures useless. The hunt for a single sniper had consumed resources equivalent to an entire division, yet she remained at large and increasingly dangerous. The turning point came during the 4th week of her independent operations. Maria had positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the enemy's main supply depot, planning to disrupt ammunition deliveries that were crucial for their planned counteroffensive. Through her scope, she observed something that would change everything: a convoy of white vehicles bearing humanitarian markings approaching the depot. Her initial assumption was that enemy forces were using false humanitarian covers to move. Military supplies, a violation of international conventions, but common enough in modern warfare. But as she watched the convoy more carefully, Maria realized these were genuine relief workers delivering medical supplies and food to civilian refugees caught in the combat zone. The ethical implications hit her immediately. For weeks, she had been operating under the assumption that everyone in enemy-controlled territory was a legitimate military target. The presence of civilian aid workers meant that her precision targeting was no longer sufficient. She needed to completely reconsider her rules of engagement. As she observed the humanitarian operation, Maria noticed something else that made her blood run cold. Enemy soldiers were positioning artillery pieces near the refugee camp, using the civilians as human shields while preparing to bombard her own army's positions. The refugees, mostly women and children from border villages, had no idea they were being used as cover for military operations. This discovery forced Maria to confront the reality that her war had become something different from what she had originally signed up for. The clear moral lines that had motivated her initial service were blurring in ways that challenged everything she believed about her mission and her methods. That evening, while hidden in an abandoned church 3 miles from the depot, Maria made a decision that would effectively end the war. Using a captured enemy radio, she contacted Colonel Lazovich directly, breaking radio silence for the first time in 3 weeks. "Colonel, this is Maria. I need to speak with you about ending this conflict." Lazovich's relief at hearing her voice was evident even through the static-filled transmission. "Maria, thank God you're alive. We've been trying to extract you for weeks. Where are you?" "That's not important right now," Maria replied. "I have information about enemy positions and operations that could end this war quickly. But I need guarantees about civilian protection and humanitarian access." What followed was a negotiation that lasted through the night and involved the highest levels of military and political leadership on both sides. Maria's unique position behind enemy lines, combined with her demonstrated ability to eliminate key personnel, gave her unexpected leverage in discussions about ending the conflict. She had observed enough of enemy operations to provide detailed intelligence about troop positions, supply lines, and defensive preparations. More importantly, her weeks of intercepting communications had given her insight into enemy morale and leadership dynamics that revealed critical vulnerabilities. The breakthrough came when Maria proposed what became known as the Kozara Accord, a ceasefire agreement that would allow humanitarian organizations access to refugee populations while establishing corridors for civilian evacuation. In exchange for this access, she would provide intelligence that would allow her own forces to achieve decisive victory without the massive civilian casualties that a conventional offensive would entail. Enemy leadership, exhausted by the resource, drain of hunting Maria and demoralized by her continued success against their personnel, agreed to preliminary negotiations. The psychological impact of a single sniper had proven more effective than months of conventional warfare in bringing all parties to the bargaining table. The formal ceasefire took effect at dawn on November 15th, exactly 6 months and 3 days after Maria had made her first impossible shot. The war that had seemed destined to drag on for years ended not with a massive battle, but with a series of precisely targeted eliminations that had convinced both sides that continued fighting was unsustainable. Maria emerged from enemy territory. On November 18th, walking across the new ceasefire line, carrying nothing but her rifle, and wearing a uniform that had been patched and repaired countless times during her weeks of independent operation. She had lost 30 pounds and bore scars from close encounters with pursuit teams, but her eyes still held the same calm determination that had carried her through sniper training. The awards and recognition that followed meant less to her than the knowledge that the refugee camps were being evacuated safely and that families separated by the conflict were being reunited. She had learned that precision in warfare meant more than mathematical accuracy. It required the wisdom to know when to take a shot and when to seek a different solution entirely. 6 months after critics had predicted she would crack under pressure, Maria Santos had proven that a 19-year-old seamstress with steady hands and patient heart could change the course of history. But the most important lesson she had learned was that true strength sometimes meant choosing not to pull the trigger, even when you knew you couldn't miss. The war was over, but Maria's transformation from village seamstress to strategic asset to peacemaker had created a legend that would inspire and caution future generations about the power of individual action in times of conflict. Her 2-mile bullet had indeed stopped a war, but not in the way anyone had expected when she first picked up a rifle and volunteered to serve her country.